that's cold," I whispered harshly to myself as I stepped out of my door and into the frigid winter night. Throughout the earlier hours of the day, snow had been falling steadily and transforming the world, and all that was outside, into a whitewashed landscape covered in several inches of snow as far as the eye could see. But now that snow had stopped falling and the sun had gone down, the whipping and biting winds had quickly come to assure the snow would stay for some time. The heavy coat that I was wearing felt useless as the wind tore through the weak spots in the sewing and seemed to touch my very soul with freezing cold it carried with it. As I shivered and tried to keep my teeth from chattering too hard in retaliation to the cold, I reached into my pocket and clumsily pulled out my pack of marbles. Through already numbing fingers, I pulled the cigarette out of its little red and white packaging and effortfully tried to light it between gusts of icy winds. After several efforts, I finally succeeded and took several drags in quick succession. There was no enjoying a cigarette on a night like this. You simply smoked it as fast as you could to take the edge off and got back inside to the warmth and comfort of modern living before you froze to death on your front porch. As I hastily tried to get to the filter of my Marlboro, I looked around at the foreign-looking landscape all around me. Yikes, not much winter wonderland right now, I thought to myself as I looked around at the twisted shadows of the trees around me and into the still, silent abyss of the darkness beyond the horizons of my property. It's strange how you don't really notice how much noise there is outside until it's all quiet. On winter nights like these, it was eerie and uncomfortably so. If it wasn't for the wind, I could have probably heard my heart beating, and between the silence and the darkness and the freezing cold, I couldn't finish my cigarette fast enough. My senses became hypervigilant as the bright ember of my cigarette distorted my vision when I drew it close to my face, illuminating everything up to my nose and pitch blacking everything beyond it. As I took another drag, the scream of a woman made me jump and gasp in complete and awful surprise. It had come from the tree line just beyond the snow-covered field of my backyard, a sharp and blood-curdling scream that penetrated the stillness of the night with an unmistakable clarity. Involuntarily, I crouched low on my porch and stared into the blackness of the winter night. I couldn't hear my heartbeat before because of the wind, but with the rising fear of the scream I'd just heard, I now couldn't hear the wind over my pounding heart. The world around me had fallen back into its unnatural silence, but the knowledge that the silence wasn't still and empty as it had been before had put me on serious edge. Cigarette still in hand, I turned around and grabbed the handle of my door to get myself inside when, once again, the stillness of the night was interrupted. The same blood-curdling scream as before could once again be heard, but this time it was louder and much closer than it had been. As the wind carried the noise of it toward me, I could discern that the scream was coming closer and closer with rapid speed, as if whatever was making the shouts was sprinting across the snow-covered field and directly towards me. Overwhelmed with panic, I stumbled into the doorway of my house and slammed the glass sliding door shut, clicking the locking mechanism on it as I did. I looked up again and screamed as the source of the screaming made itself visible to me. Sprinting toward my back porch with determined and malicious speed was a woman. Though it was dark and I could only see her rapidly moving silhouette, I could tell it was not someone who needed my help or assistance. Her hair was a disheveled mess. She wore no clothes that I could make out, and even though she was moving with the speed of someone in full sprint, her legs didn't suggest that she was running. They moved in a grotesquely awkward stammer as her arms stayed rigid at her sides. The screams grew louder and fiercer, and even through my shocked and horrified state, I knew that any human being in existence would have had to have stopped and taken a breath by now, but this woman did not. Before I could even attempt to process the horribleness I was seeing, the woman had reached the top of my porch stairs. Her movement stopped instantly as she stepped into the light of my back porch. and in the shock and disbelief at the sight of her, I fell backwards onto the linoleum flooring and desperately tried to distance myself from whatever that thing was. Her skin was blue and black, frozen from the cold. Her face was twisted into a horrible expression of pure rage, like some horrifying still frame of a rabid dog. Yellow teeth protruded crookedly out of her lips that had been drastically split down the center, perhaps as a result of moving them after they'd frozen. One of her eyes was missing entirely, gouged out of her head by some carrion bird or scavenger, an empty, mangled hole in her head. The other stared wildly and unblinking with unrestrained malice, a dead and gray gaze of total evil. Figure's wrathful eye seemed to lock with my quivering self. As soon as it took notice, she again began screaming. Horrible, ear-shattering screams that seemed to rattle my very essence. The glass window trembled violently against the percussion of sound emitting from the woman. Her face twisted into something I can only describe as hellish. Several times her frozen arms pounded against the glass, determined to try and break it down to get in. By some miracle, however, the glass held. As I wept helplessly in the kitchen of my home, the figure took off again in the same grotesque manner as before. I could hear her horrible screams as she ran around the house, pounding on walls, trying to find her way into the house. Several times I could see her peering into the windows, head pressed against the glass with the furious expression. Through my absolute horror and panic-stricken feelings, I could feel myself reaching into my pocket for my cell phone. It was as if some hidden part of my mind was remembering years of suggested implementation. When you're in danger, call the police, call the police, call the police. 911, what's the location of your emergency? As the horrible screaming and pounding against the walls of my house continued, my mind seemed to have forgotten everything it once knew. Where do I live? Oh my God, where the fuck do I live? Still unable to truly recall, my voice echoed my address from 1,000 miles away. It was like I was listening to someone else speak for me. And what's your emergency? Something's trying to break in. Something's trying to kill me. Please help. Please help me. I shouted into the receiver of my cell phone in a broken, pleading scream. Officers are on their way. They're moving as fast as they can. Is there anywhere in the house that you can hide? As I looked around my kitchen, I again saw the head of the woman peering over the living room window, her remaining eye glaring across the darkness, hunting for me. I don't know. Please hurry. Look around. Is there anywhere that you can barricade yourself? It was then that I remembered the door to the laundry room right beside me. Phone still in hand, I crawled through the threshold and slammed the door behind me as the screams picked up from the other side of the thin walls. Suddenly there was a loud crash as the front door of my house was thrown open. The terrifying howling of the winter winds screeching through the house as what could only be the horrible woman stomped across the hardwood floors. Curling up as tightly as I could, it took every ounce of control I had in me to stifle my screams and make the horrible thing aware of my hiding place. With each heavy footstep drawing closer to where I was cowering, though my breaths began to grow louder and more struggled as my heart attempted to pound out of my chest and run for the hills. As the door was thrown open, I screamed for my life. In my absolute and all-encompassing fear, I didn't even notice the uniformed shadow of a policeman shining his flashlight in my face with his gun drawn. Easy, guy. You're okay now. It took a long time to calm me down, enough to get a statement of the night's events. But as I relayed in broken sobs the horrors I had experienced, I could tell by the look of the officer's face that he thought I was full of shit. The questions he asked me seemed to affirm my suspicions. Are you on any medications? Have you taken any illicit substances tonight, sir? When's the last time you slept? As I stammered through the questions, begging the officer to take me seriously, a sharp and concerned voice barked from the other side of the now ajar sliding door to the back porch. "Richards, get over here and take a look at this." As we stepped out of the living room and back toward the kitchen, I saw Richard's partner standing out on the snow-covered porch, shivering in the bitter cold with his flashlight pointing towards the ground, his face pale and stuck in a concerned and perplexed gaze as his flashlight illuminated a trail of unmistakable human footprints, barefooted, heading away from my porch and into the frozen and desolate darkness of the fields beyond my house.